Hello and welcome to the second part of the Meet the Author series by Founding Fuel. My name is Shrinath and I run the Salient Advisory where I work on consulting in the product and AI space. And I'm talking to Sangeet Paul Choudary, who's the author of Reshuffle. We've spoken to Sangeet earlier in part one, where we talked a lot about this power shift that's happening in the age of AI. And in this episode, we want to cover how do you design strategy, both corporate as well as personal strategy in the age of AI. Thanks, Sangeet. Glad to have you here again.
Thank you, Srinath.
So, Sangeet, I'd just like to build on what we were discussing in the previous episode. We were talking about this entire shift of power. I think where we stopped is solution provider versus tool provider. We did touch a little bit about geopolitics. But if I have to step back and if take a wear the hat of a decision maker in a non-tech industry, and suddenly hearing all this change going on, I probably don't have the capability and I need to start designing my strategy. What could my starting point be, please?
Yeah, that's a great question, Srinath. So I'm going to, there are two ways to answer it. We can answer that within the frame of how we work today. We can see how does our business work today and how should we rethink our business. But if you're really doing strategy, I would say that we need to start by asking ourselves the two most important questions in strategy, which is where do we play and how do we win? What is our playing field and what is our right to win over there? And these questions may sound very theoretical, and traditionally they might have been because where do we play was defined by market, a geographical region, a certain customer segment, maybe even a use case. But today, where you play is defined by more broadly what is the end-to-end solution that your customer is looking for, and what are all the places from which the capabilities to deliver that solution come in. So
Hmm.
if you are an auto manufacturer, in the past your way to play was very clearly just auto, but today you are straddling multiple industries because data from completely different industries can be usable in your industry. The data your car generates can be usable by insurance, by driving schools, by
Hmm.
other third parties. Um, Energy on the basis of which your car runs is no longer just that one single source of energy with a single source of access network in the form of fuel stations. So there are many uh, ways in which capabilities from outside your industry can be brought in, and capabilities from your industry can be externalized to other parts. And the reason this is important is this becomes even more interesting with AI because once what you really see with the advent of AI is that the ability to perform certain forms of knowledge work, right? If you use chat gpt today, you would realize that certain things for which you needed to hire a person in the past can be done by an AI tool today. So if
Yeah.
you extend that more broadly, the ability to perform knowledge work can be now be accessed without requiring to hire and train the workforce that was previously required, which means that you can potentially access knowledge work from other industries and bring them into your industry. And so the way I would say is, think of your playing field in terms of, given what our customers context is, what is the larger problem they're looking to solve. In the past we were constrained based on the capabilities, the building blocks we had in our own industry, but now that AI comes in, do we now get access to fundamentally new building blocks? Can we reimagine a solution for the customer? All that, that whole range of capabilities that are needed to solve your customer problem, that defines your new playing field. And so in yesterday's context they may not have been in your industry. In today's context, anybody else who has access to those capabilities can also come in and solve your customer's problem. So basically the key point I'm trying to make is that with technology shifts, and even more so accelerated with AI, industry boundaries collapse, competitors from completely different spaces emerge. So you have to rethink what your playing field is, and you have to rethink within that in order to serve that customer and solve the problem, because everything always starts with the customer problem. But in order to solve that, how do you differentiate yourself? Because which of these capabilities are going to be commoditized, which of these are going to be differentiated? How do you fundamentally differentiate yourself in order to solve the customer's problem? So the key, that's the key point that I would make about thinking about strategy. You have to not just think within the context of what you do today, you have to reimagine where you play and how you win, given the realities that AI brings up.
That's interesting. Practically, I'll pick on one of the threads that you mentioned, which is if I'm running an automotive company, the data stream. So essentially, what we are talking is a marriage of multiple data and intelligence streams and strategy built on top. Um, I do know that there are some of the companies in India which are trying to offer car insurance based on how much you drive, right? Rather than a fixed pay. If you're driving a lot more, you end up paying more. But if you don't drive much, they can get the data from your car and actually give you a better package. And I think what you're saying is we'll start seeing more of these streams where you can collate intelligence from multiple fields and start building strategy on top of that. One field I know is the power industry. I think that industry is seeing a lot of change right now, where along with just power, you get data around how assets are performing. And that's changing things like the contracts between the people who maintain versus the people who own the assets. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you touch on quite a lot of interesting points over there. So I'll just try to peel out those different points because if you are thinking about strategy, each of those points are important, right? So
mhm,
the first change that we are talking about is that you can have now many new sources of data. So what that allows you to do is it allows you to combine different forms of data to answer fundamentally new customer problems that could not have been answered in the
mhm,
past, right? So the first level of value that gets created there. A second piece that's important and which the power example brings out quite interestingly is that assets are now repurposable across industry boundaries and into fundamentally new use cases as well. We see that in the path example as well, where a
mhm,
car in the past was just a way to go from point A to point B. Today, a car can also be a generator of energy and a provider of energy. And
mhm,
I think when the nuclear disaster happened in Japan, entire neighborhoods were lit by the Nissan Leaf cars at that point because that was the only source of energy that was available. Obviously, that's just one example. In general, the power industry is constantly rethinking how do we repurpose assets. But the idea of repurposing assets applies much more broadly. If you're a retailer and you have, you know, uh, stores available, repurposing them as dark stores, creating new business models around that. These are all different ways of repurposing assets so that whatever metric you had, profitability per square foot or whatever, can be fundamentally changed on the basis of that. Which then brings us to the third point that you mentioned, which is also interesting, which is that once assets become modular like this and they become uh, trackable or they start generating data, the contracts that can be structured around them fundamentally change. And that's what you're seeing in the
mhm,
power example. Those are things that you see whenever something that used to be buy and own becomes leasable. So these are all different ways in which the nature of asset changes and hence the nature of the contract through which you can access it and leverage it changes. So these are all different ways in which uh, uh, these shifts, even if we take out the current transition to generative AI, these are shifts that have sort of punctuated how the digital economy has worked because digital
mhm,
assets and hence digitized assets in general have all of these properties that we just talked about. What AI does today is it extends these properties to what we have traditionally considered as tacit knowledge, what is typically been seen as things trapped inside people's heads, highly skilled work. It's one thing to repurpose a store into a dark store. It's another thing to say that we identified that a scientist used to work in industry X and now can be moved to industry Y. That might have been
mhm.
difficult when it was tacit knowledge, but when that knowledge has been used to train a model, that model can potentially be put to use in fundamentally new use cases where it was never applied in the past. And so that's the recombination advantage that companies have today.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind, although it didn't really work, was Bose was trying to build a new suspension system for a car. And I think they invested about 20 years in the R&D, but they finally figured that it was not possible. But the principle was that what they understood in the audio ecosystem would work in damping vibrations, and they could offer a much better uh, driving experience as well as the passenger experience, no matter what the condition of the road was. But I think we'll start seeing these parallels coming up. That's what you're saying, that once you understand what's the intelligence layer, you could start looking at other industries and saying, where else will that similar parallel of intelligence work? And where can I use it there?
Yeah, I think, the fact that you proposed a counter example actually is really important over here, because one thing that's going to be different from what they did versus what's happening today is that was the case of a company that had a capability trying to reimagine the
Hmm.
capability towards a new context, right?
Hmm.
Today,
Hmm.
what we're seeing is capabilities are now available as building blocks so that somebody who knows the context really well, because a solution is never about just one capability, it's about bringing together
Hmm.
multiple capabilities to design a new solution. So, people who are closer to the context can now take these commoditized capabilities and leverage that more effectively. So, we have obviously seen many examples where capabilities were repurposed. I mean, the best example is Kodak versus Fujifilm, because Kodak tried to continue playing the full camera game, not realizing, or whether it realized, but not really wanting to play the game of chemicals, because fundamentally Kodak's R&D was built around chemicals. That is
Yeah.
what supported its business. And Fujifilm essentially just took the same chemicals and moved into the cosmetics industry and other arenas where the same chemicals could be applied, right? So in those cases, typically when a company like Fujifilm moves there, it still moves as a component provider, somebody else who knows the context and who knows the associated, complementary technologies and capabilities needed to make a solution out of out of that new capability. Uh, they are the ones who are able to really translate it to the end market. So it's possible that in the past that was more difficult to do because you just owned a capability, you did not know how it could be applied in many different places. But now that these capabilities can be available as a building block, that you can just have a model trained in a certain domain and that is made available externally, the people in a new context who understand the customer context, who understand everything else that's needed to solve the problem, could now potentially take that and innovate in a fundamentally new way that the creator of the model would not have been able to. And I think that's the real power of the recombinant innovation, that every part of this whole ecosystem of building blocks is very
It's more
different.
like
And
Lego. You're saying you can start putting it together and create new structures. Um,
exactly.
but but that also brings another challenge that so far the way organizations are structured, I think the boundaries are very clear when it comes to things like risk, governance, liability. If you start breaking it down into components, then I think there has to be a fundamental rethink about these issues as well.
Well, I think, part of it is, when so let's take the extreme example over here, right? Which is that, if a capability is being commoditized to such an extent that it can be put out there as a separate product, like Amazon putting compute as a service, right?
Hmm.
Or Twilio putting communications as a service. In that case, you have componentized the capability to such an extent that it can be used elsewhere, completely independent of its underlying assets, which are actually the ones that will be, that were traditionally powering the capability. So, how you, uh, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that the question about governance and risk is about how you manage this architecture. If you do not sufficiently partition the two things, you will you will not be able to free up the capability so that it can be used in a fundamentally new context. The reason a stripe works so well across contexts is because it completely takes away all the underlying complexity and frees up the capability independent of the underlying complexity. So independent of where the payment is being routed and who's processing the payment, it ends up being just an API call. So I think if you
Hmm.
really think about how this has to work, it has to architecturally be separated to that extent.
Hmm. But it's not just technical architecture. I think what you're saying is now a lot of
Value
other
architecture.
thinking and stuff. Yeah. So many other teams need to get involved to really harness the power because it's not just technical, but you end up having governance teams, risk teams, maybe even financial teams to come back and say, what new business models do we create from this? The moment we start looking at our assets differently, looking at opportunities differently. Um, so one of the other associated questions that is here is the build versus partner versus buy, because quite frankly, a lot of this new technology seems to be very tech driven and quite unlike what we have had in the past. And many companies struggle with finding the right talent. How do they start looking at this build versus buy versus partner? Because from what you said earlier is it's also if I get more reliant on certain tools, I'm ceding power to them, and the control point shifts. But if I'm
Yeah.
trying to build my own team, I need to start building that capability.
Yeah. No, the answer to this is true for all forms of technology. It's independent of whether it's AI or not. What
Hmm.
changes with AI is the speed at which the underlying technology can improve, and also the speed at which a technology can become commoditized. So one thing that when you're thinking about build versus buy versus partner, you need to think about two different um, axes over there in terms of figuring out how central this technology or how critical it's going to be in the future for you. So one is how central is it to your value proposition and differentiation? Uh, is
Hmm.
it uh, is it the primary basis on which you will compete, or is it just powering some corner of your value proposition where uh, your ability to differentiate is not based on it at all, right? So you
Hmm.
could argue that again, taking payments as an example, if you use Stripe, you're using somebody else's technology, but very likely you are not, you're only using it to process payments. That's not the
Hmm.
basis on which you're differentiating yourself, right? So you need to be clear about how critical is a particular technology or a particular capability towards your differentiation. And the second thing is you need to have a clear view on what is its path towards commoditization, because
Hmm.
every technology uh, has I mean, there are certain technologies that will commoditize very quickly, and there are certain others that will commoditize over time. There are certain capabilities you have internally that will potentially continue to be a source of differentiation, certain others which will commoditize over time. So the build buy partner actually works both ways. There are certain things you are doing today internally
Hmm.
that if you feel that they will start getting commoditized and hence will not be a source of differentiation anywhere for you, you want to start moving those things out as well. So it works in the reverse direction as well. And if you're
Hmm.
looking at leveraging new technologies, and some of those might be critical to your competitiveness, you would need to think about how you do that, whether you have a special whether you proactively invest in a technology provider early on, whether you build that internally, but you need some way in which you control your roadmap, because you have control over the technology's roadmap. So this question of what you keep in versus what you keep out, what you build versus what you buy, it's all going to be determined by what is your future stack, which parts of it will keep you competitive in the future, are they different from what is there today, and accordingly you'll have to figure out whether some parts of your internal business need to move out and some external things need to come in on the basis of that.
It's interesting. And one of the other takeaways that I have from what you're saying is if you don't have capability internally, look at investing in startups that are building that capability so that they become part of your orbit. And maybe later you can figure out how to use that better. Probably good news for a lot of startups which are working on the allied fields because there are now, if you align closer to certain industries, there is someone who understands the industry who's probably not able to build that today, but it could be a partner who could give you more context, as you mentioned earlier, as well as capital. So it could be both, right? So I see that as a plus for the startups. As long as you're not just a wrapper on top of a tool, as you mentioned, then I think that gets thinner. Sangeet, I want to shift this to another conversation that is ongoing today, which is personal strategy, right? And we're all living in times of flux. It's not easy. 10 years back, I could look at my career and say, I can see a steady progression of how I grow. Suddenly, everything's up in the air.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, whether you're a mid-stage professional, whether you're an early stage professional. You also mentioned that knowledge work is now being unbundled. We are seeing a lot of the knowledge workers, what they did, technology is able to do. How do I start rethinking and positioning myself in this new ecosystem?
Um, so look, I mean, the correct answer is that there are no easy answers over here, right? The more
Hmm.
we try to solve them within the current structures, the more we'll end up with solutions that are incomplete. So the correct answer in general is that there are no easy answers. However, there are a few points that I would like to make over here. The first is that um, we need to reframe how we think about the impact of technology, because today one of the most common things that people talk about is AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will. It sort
Mm.
of makes you believe that using AI is the solution,
Yeah.
and that's not really true. Not
Mm.
using AI is not the solution. Using
Mm.
AI is definitely going to help you, but whether it will help you stay competitive is not, there's no clear path towards that. So using AI is necessary, but it's not sufficient, right?
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is we need to understand that technology doesn't just take away parts of our job, it changes the entire context in which our job made sense. So very often when we think about jobs, we use terms like painter, teacher, plumber. So we assume that it's about the things that somebody does, painting, teaching, plumbing, right? But if you look at the an example that I take in my book, what happened to typists? Because if you think of typists, you'll think that their job is about typing. But what happened to
Mm.
typists when the processor came up, or word processor was invented, was that uh, typists would have thought at that time that the word processor won't take your job, but a typist using a word processor might take your job. So they would have gone to start using word processors. But what actually ended up happening was that the job of the typist completely disappeared. Whether you used a word processor or not, the typist as a job function completely went away.
Mm.
And it's not because technology took the task. Technology did not take the task. We still type today. What
Mm.
happened
Mm.
actually was that typing became so easy or straightforward that it became a commodity. Everybody could do that. And the reason the job of the typist went away was because the job of a typist was never about the task of typing. It was about managing the cost of editing, because before the word processor, managing edits was very expensive on a typewriter.
Mm.
And typists were trained to minimize the need for edits. They were so good at typing that you did not have to edit. But when the cost of edits went away, you did not need to train typists towards that particular skill anymore. That skill was not important. So I think the key point that I'm trying to make is your job holds value not because of the individual tasks you do or the individual skills you have been trained with. If you look at your job, which teams you are the part of, which organization you're the part of, which workflow you are participating in, you'll realize that you're holding certain things together. And it is really three factors because of which jobs have value. Three factors. One factor is that you bring a certain set of skills that are just there to find because you have been trained on that, etc. And you might say, well, AI is attacking that and making some of those skills more easily available. An obvious answer to that would be try to find other skills that AI can't do, but that's not really the right way to think about it, because our goal
Mm.
is not to find what AI can't do. Our goal is to still
Mm.
be relevant and valuable in the future system that's coming up. So then you need to think about two other things that you do in any job. One thing is you do coordination. You manage the workflow across many different stakeholders. It's something that no matter how agentic AI gets, coordination failures will still happen. There'll be some coordination that will new forms of coordination that will still be required to be done by a human, right? And so there is a significant level of coordination and managing workflow that anybody needs to do. And you need to constantly look around yourself and see where is work breaking down around me and how can I position myself to take over those particular parts of the workflow. And the third thing is that every job has value in a system because it takes over certain risk associated with that within that system. That risk, at the level of a CEO, that risk is about capital allocation, and so he's uh, rewarded very well. At a lower level, that
Mm.
risk might be things, what should be the last line on a particular slide, what should be the headline on a post that goes out. Every time you are making those choices, you are taking risk. So try to see
Mm.
how important is the risk you are taking, and how can you move towards more assuming greater risk in the new system that's coming up. Now the reason I keep saying the new system that's coming up is because over the next months and years, as we have seen over the last 2 years at a minimum, but I would say at least ever since COVID started till now, right? The rate of change of how workflows will be, what jobs will be required, that will constantly be in upheaval. So you have to stop looking at what the technology is taking away from you and start looking at how are systems around you changing. What are
Mm.
teams, which new teams are coming up, which teams are becoming more powerful than they were in the past, which jobs are suddenly gaining power, and why is that happening? So try to create a clear logic of why the system around you is changing, because that is where the answer to your career progression lies, not in what AI cannot do. So I think that's the key, directional shift we need to make. And that is also why I feel that as long as we keep answering this within what is happening today and what can AI not do, we will never find the answer, because the system itself is constantly changing so fast.
I like you say that because, as you rightly mentioned, a lot of people are just coming back and saying, if I learn this tool, I'll be okay. Um,
Right.
that is necessary, not sufficient, because tomorrow the tool, what you can do with the tool, maybe the tool itself will be doing. And in a way, this entire shift and trying to locate yourself in the change seems to be the people from manufacturing who realized when the first level of automation came in the IT industry 20 years ago when they came in, they ended up saying, I can't do the same thing, but I can become an industry expert and I can share my knowledge. Now, of course, with AI, maybe even the knowledge part is not there. But what you're saying is probably step back. And then, in fact, I've been telling people saying, step back, look at the systemic view of things. Don't be
Right.
very narrow in your focus because then that might shift. But if you start looking at the larger pieces, maybe you'll find something of value. And I see this playing differently for maybe mid-career professionals who already have a sense of industry. Uh, what would you say to early stage professionals, right? Because for them, it's a huge opportunity, but it's also a huge unknown.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing um, to clarify to early stage professionals would be that um, the linear view of how you manage your career is completely gone, right?
Hmm.
Um, um, how you signal your skills is also no longer just about the degree, and
Hmm.
learn your skills is no longer about just college, right? So you have to think of your career first and foremost as a continuously revolving cycle where you're every day learning, signaling, and applying to monetize those skills. So you have to constantly, I would say the most visceral and first implication of that would be, don't think that I have invested so much in a skill and now it's my time to monetize, so I'm only going to take the highest paying job. You have to start
Hmm.
thinking about how I create myself ready. How do I make myself ready for the world of constant change, which means that I should constantly be exposed to learning opportunities in the direction in which I am trying to move. I should constantly, those learning opportunities should have the right signaling power in the market, and I should have the ability to then harvest and monetize it based on the opportunities I get from there. And all those three things are subject to change in a matter of months, not decades as they used to be in the past, right? So you have to be much more proactive in how you think about the interplay between these three things, because your learning, your skills, and your earning are no longer trade-offs. They are no longer linear. You will have to think about it from a perspective of the fact that you have to constantly balance your portfolio of work in a way that it gives you access to both of these things, which might mean that under certain circumstances, if something pays less and positions you very well for future signaling, or gives you a certain kind of skill, it might be worth making that trade-off, especially given the way things are changing today. So the key point that I'm trying to make is there was a period, especially from the late 90s to say the late 2010s, when careers were so linear that people had
Hmm.
figured out how to do this arbitrage. They would just jump from company to company to company, doing the same thing 10 times in 10 years and keep increasing their salary every time. And that was the only game they played. Those games are not going to be applicable anymore. Whether you are early career, mid career, it doesn't really matter. Those arbitrage games make sense only when the system is very, very stable and opportunities are abundant and of the same type. All of that is going to change. So I think everybody has to manage their career like this portfolio of these three things, always constantly thinking about how you counterbalance this.
Yeah. So the term I heard is portfolio career from someone saying you start looking at your career as a portfolio. I would say it's more maybe think entrepreneurially, not just for a business, but also for yourself, saying, okay, constantly start seeing what you need to do. Um, Interesting times, and we'll have to see how things shape up. But thanks a lot, Sangeet. I think this was a fascinating discussion. There is a lot to play out yet, but for people who are looking to understand the space a lot more, I would highly recommend Sangeet's book, Reshuffle. He lays out a lot of these points that we discussed in far more detail with examples. I gained a lot from it, and I think you will too. Thanks again, Sangeet.
Thank you so much, Srinath.